so many people from different backgrounds, academia, practitioners, utilities. That makes my life quite hard as well, because it means that I will not be able to please all of you with the presentation. So I apologize upfront for that. Thank you, Hans, for introducing me, so I don't need to introduce myself anymore. However, I do need to introduce the task that is underpinning this webinar, and that is task 24 of the International Energy Agency Demand-Side Management Implementing Agreement. That's a very long sentence. So it's a task that fits within the DSM theme of the IEA. Our task ran for 3 years, and it will go on for 3 more years with an extension that we just received. And in those past 3 years, we already collected an enormous amount of information. We wrote several reports. We published more than 100 films, collecting a lot of knowledge from different energy experts. We have collected more than 60 case studies, analyzed several of those in depth. We published in academic journals. We published in a lot of other types of journals. We held workshops. We had even a conference, and all of this you can find on the IEA DSM website and on our expert platform. Let me warn you that, well, the big sentence, the title of the webinar, What Works and What Doesn't, will be a helicopter overview of 2 themes that I will go into detail in a few minutes. If you want more details on the actual cases, we have a lot of reports, as I said, and feel free to contact me whenever you want. Well, I hope to be able also to provide more webinars on the other subtasks in the future. So let's start. The sentence that announced this webinar and that hopefully also tickled you a little bit to actually participate in this webinar is also, in a way, I think, the main conclusion of our task. And perhaps the most important word on this slide is lasting. What we found is that in almost all of the interventions that were only focusing on the individual and not on the social context of this individual, say family, friends, co-workers, etc., and interventions that did not focus on the wider environment of this individual in terms of the technology, the infrastructure, the home, but even laws and regulations on a more landscape level, were much less successful than those that did. So even so successful that the interventions that I just talked about, they did manage to get behavioral change during their intervention, but as soon as the intervention stopped, the behavioral change stopped as well, and the behavior reverted to the old behavior, which I think, and I'm sure many of you as well, find a waste of capital and effort on the side of all participants. So what we started to try to figure out is what makes behavior not only change, but stick. And I'm going to walk you through several of the findings that we saw in the interventions where the behavior actually also stuck. So as I said, our task has been focused on 4 themes, amongst which smart metering and building retrofits. And today I will only talk about the findings for those 2 themes. For transport and SMEs, I'm hoping to be able to give you another webinar if there's sufficient interest in that. And what's also perhaps interesting to know is that for each of those themes, we investigated several case studies in more detail, focused on a very specific question. For example, in the smart metering theme in the Netherlands, we investigated the power matching city case in more detail to find out what actually not only got people to engage with the smart metering and the dynamic pricing being implemented, but also what kept them engaged. So there's more detail in that sense. So for each of the cases that we analyzed, which are more than 60, the main questions that we had were where, what, who, when, how, but mainly why did the behavior change? And that's what I'm going to walk you through. As I said, I'm not able to give you an overview of everything we've done in the task, so I'm only going to focus on one of the subtasks in our project, subtask 1. What we did in this subtask is actually appreciate that there are many different behavior change disciplines. Each of those have different models and frameworks and theories, and very often they operate in silos. And we thought that we needed to learn from how these models and theories of change were used in real life. And assessing them in real life would help us understand the benefits and the drawbacks of using certain disciplines, very often also implicitly in a lot of interventions. And as soon as we would understand how those particular perspectives were used in an intervention, we would also be able to find out how they impacted on the design, the implementation, the monitoring, and the evaluation of those interventions. Because every intervention has a background which influences how it is being performed. And we felt, and our analysis also validated this, that it's very important to find out what this background is so that you understand what works, what doesn't. So one of the key findings, so to say, and I'm going to go in more detail in a minute, is that actually every model is useful. Obviously, a lot of work has gone into developing a lot of theories and models, so of course they are useful. The problem emerges when models or theories are being used to implement an intervention focused at a certain behavioral change, which is a mismatch with what the theory or model was designed to do. So what we decided in that sense was that we would treat every model equally, and we would find out what kind of model or theory underlied the different case studies. And that was also immediately the finding number one, that as soon as you are aware as an implementer of the theory or the model that is implicitly or explicitly underpinning your intervention, you are already one step towards something that works. The next thing is that you need to acknowledge, as I said, that every model or theory is useful for what it aims to do. So you need to make sure that there is a good match. And finally, and to many of you this will most likely be a very trivial sentence, you need to take the end user perspective as a starting point. Why am I saying this is trivial to many of you? Because most interventions are actually stating, at least in a lot of their reports, that they take this end user or this client as a starting point. However, what we found is that most interventions are designed top-down with too little focus on how they are actually perceived and received by the end users. So we, and with us a lot of the experts in our task, decided it would probably be very valuable to take this end user perspective to the extreme and use it as an analysis tool, and using a story spine from an end user perspective. So what do I mean by that? I mean that every end user being targeted by an intervention, be it you or me, because we are also targeted very often by different campaigns, etc., has a set of questions that run through their minds. And those questions are, how am I motivated to respond to this intervention? Why should I do it? What do I need to do in terms of behavior? And what will others do? Will I do this alone? What will it take or what will it cost me? Will I get help? From whom? What behavior and how much behavior will I need to change? Will it be difficult? Will it be painful? What will I gain? Again, what's in it for me? Will I get feedback that I understand and that I trust and that tells me what the result was of my actions and what to do better next time? So keep this in mind, and I'm taking you to the story spine in action in the theme of retrofitting. What we found in the 15, more or less 15 case studies that we analyzed focused on building retrofitting, was that most of them actually are informed by, and very often implicitly, some kind of economic theory or model. And usually the barrier being perceived in the intervention that needed to be handled was either a lack of money or a lack of information on the side of the end user. So the intervention is assumed that if end users would be given money, say in the form of subsidies or loans or even free, easy-to-access money, and if they were given information on how to do it and why to do it, they would be convinced and act in a very rational manner and would actually undertake the retrofitting. Remember the story spine and the questions that I just mentioned. What you see here is actually the answer from those type of interventions, being subsidy schemes for building retrofits, to the questions of the end user. So this is a story on retrofitting being told to you and me as end users when we think about whether or not to retrofit and make use of a subsidy scheme. Dear homeowner, money makes the world go round. You need to change your home's energy use, and we will help you by paying, well, at least part of its retrofitting. By the way, we know you need the money, but you need to pay up first, and it might take a while before we pay you back. Sorry about that. The information that you need to make a decision, yes, well, we need that information as well. So I think it's good if you find it, and all the information that we need will teach you all you need to know as well. So in the end, you only need to make one-off decision to invest. We have the technology you need. There are many contractors or installers. No, we don't have a list with recommended ones. You need to find them and choose them yourselves. Sorry again. And they will put it in, and that's it. If you don't understand the technology, well, just don't touch the button. That's the safest. You will save money for a nice weekend to the Bahamas or a nice night out at a restaurant or shopping afternoon, whatever you want. You only need to give us a bill from your installer so that we know you actually did the retrofitting, and we probably won't check how much energy you actually saved. Because what counts for us is how many square meters were insulated, how many homes are retrofitted, or how much money is spent. Oh yes, of course. And how many kilowatt hours are saved. Don't worry, we will do the number crunching. We have really cool models to do so. We really don't need to know if you actually saved what we're calculating. Oh, you want to know if you did it and if you actually saved some energy. Well, there are a lot of metering devices out there. I'm sure you will find one that you like. I think most of you will not like this type of message. However, if you do the story spine analysis, as I discussed, you will find that most subsidy schemes and wider building retrofitting schemes are actually messaging this. So what happens is actually that only those people that were already considering retrofitting their homes are retrofitting their homes. However, what is interesting to know is that the plans for the retrofitting become much more comprehensive, and the plans are upgraded. So if we take a close look at what these type of models actually do well, is that they are relatively easy to evaluate, quantitatively at least. As I said, each model is very good at what it's intended to do. The retrofitting market, so the supply side, can grow. The subsidy is very often used to the max. A lot of people are left out in the end. Many homes are insulated, and you see that this type of intervention that has an economic underpinning does indeed manage to nudge a certain percentage, up to 20%. Of the population in very good cases, but the 80% of the next adopters, so to say, are not motivated clearly by this type of messaging. If you're lucky, neighbors start to do it as well, so new social norm, at least on the local level, seems to be emerging. And as I've said, the participants that already decided to retrofit do it much more comprehensively. However, if we want to tell a learning story, and that's what our task was about, what these type of projects do is that they are one-off programs, and there is no continuity after the installation or the retrofitting in general. And there is this big paradox that I hinted at the beginning. Those interventions are actually targeting two barriers, lack of information and lack of money, but they very often require a lot of pre-financing and pre-work in terms of information collection by the house owners. There's hardly no flexibility, only in terms of financial flexibility, so how much you are able to get from the subsidy, and technological tailoring in the sense that your home might need different types of retrofitting measures. So it's not focused on changing the use patterns. And this is actually a problem, because what you see happening in projects that only focus on this one-off decision, investment decision, they show, if they are being monitored and evaluated on the longer term, very often also rebound. So people who, for example, had a house that was not very comfortable in terms of warmth, find it's much more comfortable now and find it somehow comfortable to heat multiple rooms instead of the one they were sitting in before. And the big question you could ask is, will this type of intervention really change the building sector or the market? Well, the answer there clearly is no, but yes, we do need these type of interventions as well. What we did also is we drew a lot, or got cartoonists to draw cartoons for each of the cases. Just for you to know, it might be interesting to go through them, because it's a very good means of actually highlighting the main lesson from different types of interventions. In this case, this is a more or less satirical comic for the Dutch block-by-block approach, which was to some extent successful, but so much paperwork was needed that you could actually build a house with the paperwork you needed to collect. So, of course, what I just mentioned are not the only lessons learned in the building retrofitting theme. We had many more. And these are the top 10 of those do's and don'ts. I had to make a choice between either discussing the cases or discussing the findings. So I hope you trust me enough, for now at least, for me not to have to go into detail in the cases and demonstrating why this do or don't indeed is relevant. If you want to find out more, feel free to read the reports, as I said, or contact me. I'm always in for a good discussion. The first recommendation, or the do, that we found in the building retrofitting theme is you need to focus on the social side. A lot of interventions think that people are individuals and are not part of a social group or a wider society. Those that do acknowledge this and make use of peer-to-peer education or the neighbor effect, and that actually involve the family or the workers, co-workers of a certain target, are much more successful at implementing the intervention and gaining as much saving as possible. So that's the first recommendation, focus on the social side. The second recommendation, or do, is that you need to appreciate that it's not just what we buy, it's what we do with what we buy. So it's again an argument to focus not only on investment behavior, this one-off type of behavior, but also the use of the building and its installation or appliances. If the installations or the appliances are not being used the way they were meant to, you might end up with a big problem in terms of savings. This is also a big question in terms of energy performance contracting in the residential area. So the next do is actually very much related to the second one. You need to change lifestyles and not light bulbs. So what we found is that programs that have a more systemic perspective, so also focus on those elements that I mentioned in the sentence at the beginning of the webinar. So you need to also focus on the social environment and the physical, technological, political, institutional, etc. environment. They actually get farther in terms of what they achieve, and sometimes they have even a lot of spillover effects to other types of behavior that should be more efficient, like transport behavior or behavior at work. So change lifestyles, not light bulbs. One recommendation that actually is a recommendation that we found relevant for all the themes that we investigated is that you need to think of the distribution of cost and benefits. Very often, only the supply side has the longer term type of benefits, or at least those are clear and mentioned. So you need more transparency, what's in it for the end users, whether it be better health, jobs on the social, on the local level, fewer sick days, more comfort, more control, more ease, etc. Find out what's in it for the end users and make sure you deliver that. And when you deliver, use trusted intermediaries. When it's, what we found is that when it's only one type of messenger, say the governmental agency, the message is less likely to be trusted and adhered to. So those interventions where they actually had a consortium of partners that usually are not very comfortable working together, name for one governmental agencies and NGOs, and they collectively deliver a message, you see the message gets much more listened to. Well, the next one, I already mentioned it a few times, don't ask for too much upfront financing or information. That's a very clear one. The next one, as I said before, you need to think about benefits to the end users. You need to change lifestyles, not light bulbs. This also means that it's actually quite useful to work with multiple parties, from governmental agency to landlords and NGOs or even district health boards, because working in this type of cooperation can result in a much more diverse set of instruments being used, which then in the end also targets much more needs and type of people. And you're also able to target outcomes that are not directly related to energy efficiency. For example, health improvements. One of the cases that has also been used by the IEA in a recent report on benefits beyond kilowatt hours, a New Zealand intervention called Warm Up New Zealand, actually was very successful at providing more jobs, reducing the number of asthma attacks with up to 40%, reducing the number of sick days with, well, a very high percentage, I think 39%. And they actually were able to retrofit more than 200,000 homes, which is a lot in New Zealand. And that was to a large extent also due to the fact that there was a multiple party consortium. Recommendation or do number 8, or don't number 8. Don't box people in too much. You need to focus on the function of the energy and not on what the energy is being used. You need to find out why it's being used, and then you need to target the why of the behavior. And to be able to do so, recommendation number 9, do pre-scope, do benchmark your heart out, and measure and model. Don't rely only on modeling. Final recommendation is you need to learn from the unwilling. Those people that opt out or do not participate are likely to lead you to design an intervention that reaches the 80% of people that still need to be reached. So focus on those dropouts and ask them to explain why they dropped out. Next theme, and I'm sorry if this is really cutting corners in that sense. As I said, I hope you will find your way to me or my cooperating agent, Rotman, and start a discussion on this. And otherwise, in the reports, the cases are described in much more detail. Smart metering, that's the next theme. And I'm going straight to the recommendations. What we found, namely in a lot of the more state-of-the-art type of interventions with dynamic pricing, etc., is that time isn't always money. So those type of projects are very often based on the assumption that people react rationally when they are stimulated with the right economic or informational trigger. However, what we found is that it's very clear that those economic gains or losses are important, but they are not necessarily worth the time spent in changing the behavior. And sometimes, if the peak and off-peak prices are not considered carefully, you might even get a sort of rebound effect where people start using much more energy in the off-peak period, still resulting in financial savings, but actually increasing the energy use. And I don't think that's what we want to go to in terms of the transition to a more energy efficient demand-side management sector. The second don't is you need to appreciate the technology, sorry for the typo, isn't everything. So simply pushing it won't work. And smart metering projects are by definition projects that push a technology. And very often households do not feel, at least, they need it. So the key in the interventions that were successful in the adoption rate was to make sure that the smart meter was a gateway to gain other benefits or the multiple benefits that I mentioned or referred to earlier. So make sure that the technology is not the end point, but it's the starting point and a gateway. Again, the same recommendation that I mentioned in the retrofitting theme, make sure that the value for the customer is clear and be transparent. The issue of the distribution of costs and risks and rewards is key. And you see it's very often not addressed in those type of smart metering interventions. And what happens is that end users that are not stupid very often feel that the distribution of the costs and the benefits actually benefit the utilities and the DSOs more, at least in the longer term and in terms of customer loyalty or avoided investments in the grid or more information on customers in the open data sphere. And the end users themselves, of course, could benefit if they actually start doing something with information from the smart meter. But in that sense, they feel the effort is on their side and they don't get the benefits very clearly laid out to them. This seems a paradox because I'm saying give them information and I'm now saying information is important but isn't everything. So it needs to be coupled to active or shared learning type of interventions. There were several interventions in, for example, Portugal and Sweden, where they got real people to interact with each other and share information and lessons learned. And those interventions actually got a much higher saving rate than those that only used an energy display or even only the smart meter. The next do is, again, learn from those that do not want to participate. What you see in a lot of interventions, and it's slowly changing now that the market uptake is increasing a little bit, is that the people participating have self-selected themselves. And they are not representative of the 70% that also needs to start moving, so to say, but isn't yet. So you need to talk to those as well and find out why they're not moving and how the technology and the intervention could be better tailored to their needs. Another problematic issue of a lot of smart metering interventions to date is they actually target the behavior of people and not of the home. And if they target the behavior of people, they very often only target the behavior of the household, not taking into account that the household is consisting of a husband and a wife that might have very different views on comfort or ease or control, and kids if they are there. So you need to make sure that the intervention is tailored to also take into account the impact of the house on the energy bill and the impact of the different household members on the energy bill. And then personalities are very influential. That's one finding that was quite many times repeated in a lot of the cases. If the installation of the smart meter was done by an installer that was actually socially talented, the acceptance rate was much higher. So those people are the first people in, and if they're not the right people, they're also the last people in. So make sure that the people that you send for your intervention to do the installation are people that are actually able to talk to the people in the household and get them to also potentially give them tips and tricks, etc. Well, the home is their castle. I think that's very trivial as well, but it means that you need to make sure that you appreciate that people do not invest in their home, but they invest in their life. And this means that you need to be aware of the fact that people value different things at different times, sometimes even in their home. And the home is their castle. And for example, in the Power Matching City case that we did, that we analyzed in the Netherlands, what was very, very important is sometimes if the installation took a lot of time and sometimes a lot of effort, rewarded. A small flower is sometimes sufficient to get people much more accepting of what's happening in their castle. You won't believe it, but sometimes the technology is a big mismatch with the target group. So in one of the cases, the internet penetration rate was really low amongst the target group, and still they were being equipped with smartphones that would allow them through internet to access their home, which doesn't work. Next one, focus on the why. I think I made that point quite clearly. You need to focus on the practice and the function of the use and not the use check. So focus on the why. And to find out what this why is, participation is key. Engage, discuss, communicate, if possible, co-create with the people that you're targeting. That makes them participants and partners instead of customers, and that's really key to the high uptake. Almost last one, no one likes waste. So talking about wastefulness in interventions may be much more effective than talking about saving money or saving energy. So focus on the wasteful behavior, and that might be a key to actually finding a gateway to much more difficult types of behavior to change. And finally, and I know all of you know it, so I'm not going to tell much about it, people want to know how they're doing. And not only want to know how they're doing, they want to know how they're doing compared to their peers, and do not make the mistake of choosing for them who their peers are. They want to choose who their peers are. In projects where the choice was made top-down, people did not feel represented by the peer group they were in. And finally, they also not only want to know how they're doing, but also how to do better. That's something that very often comes up as a question in interventions from the target group, and there's no answer. And then they opt out, they drop out, because they can't do anything with the information they received that they need to do better. So this leads me back to the slide I started with. Those do's and don'ts that I discussed are to some extent all related to this notion that if you want to achieve behavioral change that extends beyond the period of an intervention, you need to target the social environment of people, so their friends, their family, their co-workers, and you need to also start changing the context in which these behaviors are performed. If you don't change the context, it's too difficult for people to keep up the fight of behavioral change. I know I dropped an information bomb on you. I'm sorry about that. There is a lot of slow time, so to say, to read in all the reports and stories that we wrote or the cartoons. So please go to the website of the ieadsm or to the Task 24 NING expert platform, and you will find all the information you need. I just want to end with a very small context to our task. We are an international project with 8 countries participating in the form of providing the budget. And we have 5 countries that also contribute in kind with, for example, time or knowledge. And we have a huge smart brain of more than 200 experts from around the world that are contributing in kind and are very committed. So they help us write the reports, analyze the cases, disseminate, organize workshops, etc. The premise of our task, so why did we start with this task, why did we develop it, was the behavioral wedge that was coined a few years ago by Stern, if I'm not mistaken, where he said that 30% of energy demand is actually locked in the behavioral wedge. So if you are successful at targeting behaviors like technology uptake, use and maintenance, purchasing, investment, the habits and the routines, and the social acceptability of technology, you get a long way to actually closing this wedge. And what we indeed found and used as a starting point for our task was that this behavioral wedge results from the fact that a lot of interventions are built around the assumption that we humans act rationally, and to some extent we do. And if you really make an effort at understanding us, we do act rationally. But you need to understand the why behind the behavior that doesn't look rational at first sight. Very often also it's very much a technology push approach instead of also a demand side listening. There is limited transfer of best practice and knowledge and research from practitioners and academia to the policy domain and vice versa. And there is a lack of meaningful monitoring and evaluation. So who are we doing this work for? Actually for all those out there that are behavior changers, so those that are attempting at changing behavior of others. And those can be intermediaries, policymakers, research funders or investors, and technology developers and industry, and of course also end users themselves in the form of communities, etc. This is a very quick overview of our task. Today I focused on subtask 1, the helicopter overview of models, frameworks, etc. We also did a lot of in-depth case study analysis in subtask 2. We just finished today our evaluation subtask where we propose a new form of evaluation and monitoring for behavioral change. And we are drafting up the final reports with do's and don'ts that are country sensitive. And finally, overarching is the expert platform, so this huge super brain that I mentioned before. As I said, we're not finished. We're going to continue for the next 3 years. I'm not going in detail in this slide. You can take your time looking at it if you want later. What's important to know is that the next 3 years will be about translating everything we collected, so not so much collecting more translating it into the policy and the practitioner's domain. If you want to reach us or join us in our Superbrain, contact us. Here is the website, our emails, and our Twitter accounts. We are very happy to welcome you. And this is it, the end.